All right, so what we need to do is begin to sort through this. And so this is our first sort. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. I've learned a lot about this concept of cosmos. I've been really surprised at what I've learned, and it's way beyond what I expected. So for me, this is a big deal. There are different ways you could sort, but I'm going to actually do it a couple different ways. First of all, I'm going to not even sort, but I'm just going to scroll. Look at Matthew. He talks about the world in 9 different verses. Mark only mentions it 3 times. Luke only mentions it 3 times. John? Good grief. Well, what is that about? That's about 50 times. So right away, we already know something. The concept of cosmos in the Gospel of John is super important. And here's something that before you even sort through it, you look at this and you say, whoa, it's in chapter 1, it's in chapter 3, it's in chapter 4, it's in chapter 6, it's in chapter 7, it's chapter 8, it's chapter 9, chapter 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 21. Whatever cosmos means in the Gospel of John, it must be really important. For him to use it that many times, way more than Matthew, Mark, or Luke, way, way, way more, it must be really important in the Gospel of John. So that means, therefore, I need to do a lot of study. In fact, if I were doing a paper, I don't even know if I could do a paper. I think there's so much in the Gospel of John, it would be beyond my paper. But I certainly have learned a lot already. I've learned that the Gospel of John has a major focus on cosmos, and really, honestly, it looks to me like I need to go into the Gospel of John and examine cosmos there, see what I can find. All right, then I go to the book, the Paul's books, and I say, well, it's a lot of times in Romans, but look at the Corinthians. Look at Corinthians. Look at that. That's 1, 2. That's I don't know. That looks like about 20 to me. That's a lot. Well, I could just figure it out. Yeah, it's 17. There's 16. That's a lot. 16 different times it comes into Corinthians. Way more in the Gospel of John. Corinthians is quite a bit shorter, though. 2 Corinthians only 3 times. Galatians only 2 times. Ephesians only 3 times. Philippians only once. Colossians 3. 1 Timothy 3. So I'm just going to step back and say, what is going on with 1 Corinthians? And it's kind of like more than just a few verses, few chapters. It's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 11, chapter 14. That's a lot of different chapters. So it says to me that cosmos is also an important subject in the book of 1 Corinthians. You know, the funny part of it is, you might not notice that when you did your exegesis of 1 Corinthians. It might not even jump out to you. But now I say, I need to look out for cosmos in 1 Corinthians. There's something going on there that I don't know about. And when I do my study on the word world, and I'm trying to understand what the world is in biblical theology, if I don't understand, why is it that John uses it so much? Why is it that 1 Corinthians uses it so much? What is there that Paul is trying to get to in 1 Corinthians? And he uses this concept of the world in order to say something or do something to the Corinthians. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, this is not a small thing. This is a big thing. Because it means that Paul's using this word cosmos to accomplish some purpose. He's trying to get a truth across to them. He's trying to open their eyes to something. And therefore, if I'm going to do a biblical theology of cosmos, I'm not only going to ask the question, what does it mean? I'm also going to ask the question, how is it used? What is Paul doing? Why is cosmos so important in 1 Corinthians? Well, it's not important in 2 Corinthians. Well, it's not important in Galatians or Ephesians or Philippians. So it's important questions. And then it's kind of there in Hebrews and stuff. Peter does mention it. Then look at 1 John. Whoa, 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 what's going on here? Look at that. 1 John has a bunch of uses. Chapter 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can promise you that in the in book of 1 John, every single use of cosmos is significant. I don't know if every single, but every single one I've looked at. So now we have this crazy thing. We see this word appearing again and again and again. And therefore, that means that there's something going on here, that some authors use it a lot. John uses it just straight through his theology. It's just really important as theology. Only 3 times in Revelation, but that's a little bit deceptive because he uses ion instead. Okay, so we'll have to look at that. I would have to look at that in my paper. But now, just by surveying, I begin to see there's a pattern. Wow, look at the Gospel of John. Look at that. And that's a lot of times in the book of Matthew, too. Compared, now that we've seen all the books, we realize Matthew has it a lot. Yes, Matthew's a really long book. Yes, I understand that. But it's pretty important to see that it is used 9 times. That's pretty significant. So what we're doing is we're looking for patterns. So having seen this, I would go over to my whiteboard and I would make like 5 or 6 comments without having yet done any extra work. I haven't even done exegesis yet. But I'm going to make some comments about it's really important in the Gospel of John for some reason. It's really important in John's writings as a whole. It's really important in 1 Corinthians. It's kind of important in Paul's other letters, but Corinthians, it's just like a key theme in the book. Wow. And I'm sure every commentator on Corinthians says that, but I've never read it. I'm sure they all say it, but I've never read it. So that's interesting. And so I have a lot to work with here already, and I haven't even started exegesis. Kind of important in the book of Romans. Kind of important there, but 1 Corinthians, it's very important. All right. So what we're doing is we're going through and we're looking for patterns. First thing I'm doing is looking at who uses it a lot, which books does it appear in a lot. Now, we haven't done exegesis yet, which is we're not going to do it in this course because we don't have time. But if we did do exegesis, you're going to have to do some. You can see that I'm not joking, that you've got 3 months or a year's worth of work. If you're going to write a biblical theology and cosmos in the New Testament, I mean, every single one of these verses, we're going to have to look at the verse in context, and obviously in the Greek. If you're doing the Old Testament, obviously in the Hebrew. People who are doing mishpat, you're going to see this. You'd have to do serious exegesis in order to be able to understand that passage in its context. And that's what we're looking at, passages. And we were asking the question, how is the word cosmos used? Why is it used? How is it important here? How does this contrast with the way other writers use it? What patterns do I see? And what can I begin to understand about cosmos? And I take that whiteboard, where I'm writing principles, and I take it and I start writing principle after principle after principle after principle. Already I'm going to have like 4, 5 principles that it's really important in Corinthians, it's really important in Matthew, it's extremely important in the Gospel of John, way, way, way beyond anywhere else. Also in John 1. Very important. And so now that I know this, I go, wow, then what do I do with it? I don't do anything yet. All I do is as I look at these patterns, I just fill my whiteboard. Then when I start doing my searches, which we'll do in the next video, not only do I look for that, I'm also looking for other patterns that will help me understand it better. Okay, we'll stop here. I'm trying to make these short. I don't want to go any longer.